Thank you so much for having me. My name's Neil Wood. I run the team here at RxSoil. So we're a small employee-owned business here, and we really help connect people to laboratories. That's really what we do. I run the business, and most of what we do is in soil. So there are several people on my team who have a little more expertise in soil specifically than I do. But what I'm here is to go through today a little bit about what we offer and just answer any questions that we kind of have along the way. I think we've got a couple great things to take a look at, and thank you again for having me.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what makes RX Soil different?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just a little bit about our model. So we are not a laboratory facility. So the team and the company that I run is a lot more close to a technology customer service company than it is a traditional lab. We partner with a number of labs across the country. So even though we're going to talk a lot about soil nutrients today, we also have people come to us and test for soil nutrients, texture, compost, fertilizer. On the contaminant side, we do lead, arsenic, heavy metals, pesticides. We've done some work before with PCBs, volatile organic compounds. Really, if you have a need in soil testing, we've really just wanted to listen to the community, see what types of testing you're interested in, and find the right lab partners for it.
Can you explain a little bit about, to the audience, the people who may not know how the kit works, how you all work from the point of the order and then them sending it in to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think with traditional soil testing and kind of decades past, there was this model of, kind of trying to find or call a lab, printing out or filling out submission forms, kind of going through a submission sheet, checking some boxes, writing a paper check, some number of days or weeks after you send a sample, go to the post office, find shipping. So that's how it was. And what we're really trying to do is kind of update that whole process for anything that you want to test in your soil. So if you go to RxSoil.com, you can take a look at a number of different offerings that we have, but they all work pretty much the same way. You order with us, then in the next day or two, we'll have that shipped directly to you, and you're going to get a package that includes the soil sample collection bag, an instruction card, the actual mailer box that it goes back to the lab. It's sent with that. On the bottom, right here on my desk, on the bottom of that mailer box, we've already got the postage already attached to the bottom. So every part of the process, the lab analysis, the report that we write at the end of it, it's all in one pricing. So we wanted to make it really simple, really clear, transparent pricing, no shipping to get to you, no shipping to get to the lab. All the prices that you see on the site for all of those services are all inclusive and everything's there.
And what's the turnaround time to get the results?
Absolutely. It depends on what you're testing. Nutrients. So for nutrients, we're using Waypoint Analytical for all of our agronomic work. So I just say kind of 1 week from mailbox to the time that it's in your inbox.
And we have another question here from, excuse me, Vanessa. She said, have you ever done comparisons of your results versus EDU results?
What helps here is, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, is about laboratory method. So the results that commercial labs like Waypoint are using are going to be really directly comparable to any of the one that your local university extension or maybe a county extension office is able to provide. You know that we're going to use Malic 3 for that. So that's going to be the laboratory analysis method that we're using. So, and that is really the universal standard when it comes to nutrient testing.
Grace, to answer your question, the recommendations are there, and you can see those here where they recommend, yearly or annually what you need. You give your recommendations based on, the season, which is fantastic.
Software that actually goes in and is able to make those recommendations. When you very first purchase or register a test with us, you'll actually get a box that says, are you growing a cool season grass, a warm season grass? What square footage? How big of an area are you working with? Do you have a preference between conventional fertilizers or organic fertilizers? And by taking those inputs and the lab results from the laboratory, the software can kind of go through and take a look and see, okay, in this situation, we've got this particular grass type. I'll want to make sure that we put down 3 pounds per 1,000 of nitrogen annually, and that's going to be our cap, and we're not going to go over that. So it's going to take a look at some very common products that are on the market, some 1602s, some 32010s, and it's going to say, here's how much that we need to put down in early spring, late spring, midsummer, early fall, late fall. It'll take a look at those scenarios, and it'll make sure that you're getting the appropriate amount of these nutrients down without exceeding any kind of caps or going further into any kind of nutrient excesses. So yeah, and this kind of goes back a little bit to the earlier point of we really just kind of want to listen to what the community would like from a testing standpoint. There's a lot of different types of tests that labs can run, and texture was one that we kept hearing over and over again. It's really important to get a really good lock on your recommendations to be able to have some of that texture information as well. But it's also just good to know from kind of an amendment and remediation standpoint. We have the standard nutrient test will give you your capacity to retain nutrients, your CEC number, and your level of organic matter. And being able to look at that with a specific breakdown of sand, silt, and clay is really important because that is going to be able to kind of tell you where are you in that triangle and kind of how far away might you need to go. I was asking PJ at the start of this if we wouldn't mind a little bit of demonstration here. And if this is a good time for it for you, I think I'd just like to kind of open it up a little bit. So I brought a little soil, and I thought it might be fun for us to talk a little bit about soil texture and the way that you can get some of that information either at home or through a lab. So I've got a little bit of a demonstration here that we can go through. Presented on screen right now. There's a few of these out there. If you just kind of do a search for soil texture by feel, you can get some really, really good guides about just being able to take your soil and apply a little bit of water to it and kind of see how it performs. On desk, I've got my soil from my front yard. So I'm going to go through and just kind of go through the standard procedure with it here. So I'm just going to go through and just kind of remove a little bit of rocks, remove a little bit of roots, and just kind of leave myself with something that I can make a pretty good soil ball out of. And what we're going to be doing is building a soil ribbon. If you do a test with us, some of the descriptions of soil types, they're going to talk about soil ribbons. And if you've never done one, we're really just squeezing soil together and just kind of seeing how it behaves. What we're going to do here is, okay, so now I think I've gotten pretty much all my debris out of it, and I'm left with pretty much just the soil from the side yard here. So I'm going to go, and I'm just going to get a little bit of water. It doesn't take a ton, but we're just going to saturate this a little bit. We'll just ignore the small ant crawling up my arm, and then we're just going to push it together. And if there's a little too much water in it, it's just going to kind of bleed off the water a little bit here. But then in that case, I'm just going to add just a little more soil until we get something that is, kind of the consistency of kind of like a clay putty. First test on this list that you can go through with a guide like this. So I'm going to squeeze it, and the answer is, does it remain in a ball when squeezed? And it sure does. This thing is pretty stable. It is not too dry, and at this point, is it too wet? I think I've gotten it to a point where it's no longer just kind of dripping off water or anything. So we're gonna start our first run of it with what we have here. So place a ball between the thumb and forefinger and gently push the soil with the thumb, squeezing it upward into a ribbon. So I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna do this one, and this is our soil ribbon. And if I put it sideways, you're going to be able to see that at some point when you are kind of pushing this upwards and forwards, it's going to very naturally start to kind of break apart a little bit. And that's what we're looking for. What we're looking for next is kind of the distance that this is going to start to break apart. And we're going to try to measure that. So if it doesn't form a ribbon at all, if it just completely starts to disintegrate, just as though it were just kind of, more sand-like when you get to this point, then you've got loamy sand. Otherwise, we're going to take a look down a little bit, and we're going to kind of just try to take a rough measurement as to when does it really start to break apart. And I'm going to call that maybe about 3 centimeters before the length just started to really kind of fall apart on itself. So now this had about 3 centimeters long, and now excessively wet, a small pinch of soil in the palm. So now I'm just going to take a small pinch of this, I'm just going to excessively wet this now. And then we're just going to move it around here. I'm just going to move it around, and I'm just going to kind of feel what I feel in there. So if there's still any small rocks in here or anything like that, I'm just going to force those out into the side a little bit and just try to leave as much just soil as I can here at this point. So now kind of the next three questions on the prompt that was on screen a moment ago is, does the soil feel very gritty? Not a little gritty, not, I wouldn't say that it just feels all gritty at this point. Does it feel really smooth? It's pretty smooth. So I think at this point, I might go ahead for this, just one fast test. I might say yes to that question. And then that flow diagram is going to point to me and say, you have silty clay loam. When you send a sample into the lab, it's going to be a lot more precise than what we just went through. They're going to actually go through and they're going to measure, with actually being able to take a look at particle sizes, and they're going to be able to determine sand, silt, clay, and actually make that determination. This will be the soil texture triangle. Once you hit that 14% line, start moving over to the right, your next intersection will be with your silt percentage. So that, starting in the top middle and then going down to the right, those lines are the ones that go from about 2 o'clock to 7 o'clock on the clock. So those are the top rights to bottom lefts. So when you hit your silt percentage, in your situation, this is about 35% silt, then you should start to see that triangulation come in. So from the left, you're at 14%. From the top right, you're at 34%. And then that should really make sure that that number in the bottom, those lines that go from bottom right to top left, that should be around 50%. And yours is, because you've got 51.5% sand. So all of that means that it's going to land right in this one particular point in the triangle. And based on the shapes that we have here, you know that you are firmly in the category of loam, which is fantastic. And that's what we're really looking for. So we really try to aim for that kind of bottom middle quadrant, so that we know we're kind of getting the best physical characteristics of any soil that we can work with. In the event that when the audience might test their own soil and they're a little bit more towards the outside of that triangle, then there are lots of great remediation steps that we can take. For lawns in particular, this is really where we start to ask the question, is this a preparation for kind of a new seed in a new area? Or is this something where we've got an established lawn and we're just trying to perform a little maintenance throughout the years? pH is, it's one of those top level properties that we look at on the report. We've got pH, organic matter, capacity to retain for properties of soil at the top of each of our nutrient reports. We've got phosphorus and potassium for our macronutrients, and then we've got another 8 micronutrients below that. But soil pH being kind of that nice place to start, we found that there's this ideal range for soil pH, kind of in that 6.2 to 6.8 plus or minus a tenth area there. Really in the sixes, depending upon what you're growing, depending upon your grass seed varietal and a couple other factors. Just generally speaking, we'd like to see something that's pretty close to the mid sixes. Everything on your report can be in the greens, but if your soil pH is that full point and a half off, that's really where, the plant's ability to actually get access to those nutrients is really going to be challenged. So standard basic Malic 3 test is not typically going to return those nitrogen values due to the volatility of it in the sample. We don't want you to send us a sample this week and us get a result back to you next week if there's an almost certainty that there's been a substantial change in your nitrogen in between the time that you took that sample and the time that we were able to report it. But nitrogen is absolutely taken into account for the recommended products. And the reasoning for that is because depending upon your area and what you're growing, there's going to be that annual specified nitrogen need for that area. And for, if working with the gardening community, where there's not that kind of consistent ground cover that's pulling all that nitrogen out of the ground, then this is much more like, an eighth of to like 1.2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet annually. When we start getting into turf grasses, then depending upon the seasonality, the variety, the varietal, a few of the other conditions, we're much more somewhere between 2.5, 3.5, 4 pounds per thousand. So that's where the nitrogen number that you see on the report is going to come from, is to account for that annual nitrogen need throughout the year.
Okay.
So yeah, I just wanted to just start a little bit with that background. I sent over a few images earlier of a couple different examples of deficiency and abundance. And as long as I didn't get these pictures crossed, a little bit about, I believe we're starting with nitrogen deficiency.
Nitrogen, yeah.
Okay.
This looks like
And in this one, so nitrogen deficiency affects the older growth and can typically be seen at the bottom of each blade of grass. So this is really just kind of where that macronutrient is kind of lacking presence, and you're really not going to be able to see that kind of from the top to the bottom. As we go through here, you'll kind of notice a little bit of a theme with each of these images, which is that if there's a deficiency or there's an abundance, it's going to look like yellow kind of dying grass, because as we start to have a deficiency or an excess in one or the other, that's really where we're starting to really be able to choke out other nutrients' ability. It's kind of looking at a fertilizer burn here. So this is where, we've kind of had an over application of nitrogen in a particular area. Around phosphorus deficiency, we're looking out for reduced and slowed growth. You can start with a little bit of coloration as kind of dark green spots that start to look a little purple as kind of that red pigmentation starts to settle in. Really underwhelming growth, thin, less dense patches, really a lot of ability to kind of leave area open for weed growth, and really kind of crumbly surface soil erosion. Can be kind of a couple things that you can see if you're just really short of phosphorus. It does not take a lot of phosphorus in order to really be able to satisfy here. On your report, you'll kind of see a phosphorus range, kind of in the mid tens that you're looking for, kind of in that 20, 30, 40, 50 part per million range. I would say that most reports, mine including, have one or two items in there where, all the bars are kind of green and the level's really nice and perfect, except for kind of this one nutrient that might be, kind of 2/3 of the way up, and it's not quite as tall as the rest of them. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on a lot of your recent climate, absolutely, with kind of what you're growing, your soil consistency, when you fertilize last. There's a lot of factors that go into it. If you are kind of in the mid-optimal on one particular, micronutrient like a manganese or something, then it might not be that important to run out and find a particular source of just that, because some of these might be a little difficult to economically find a really, kind of easy source for that one. What we really like to recommend is micronutrient blends that don't also have traditional NPK fertilizer associated with them. Yeah, that's a great question. We don't have we don't sell fertilizer here. We don't have a partnership with any kind of private label brand. We just give the recommendations. So when you look at our reports, it's going to say 1602. It's going to say this particular calcium carbonate equivalent. It's going to say this percentage of elemental sulfur in the bag. We just give the formula, and that way, if you would like to find it online, if you would like to go into your local garden center with those numbers, then you're just looking at the back of the bag for guaranteed analysis or for that kind of guidance from the staff there. So yeah, absolutely. Whenever RxSoil, so we're offering soil testing services from coast to coast here, but because we're both in Virginia and we have the opportunity to kind of have a little bit of kind of mid-Atlantic, kind of regional conversation as well. I always like to mention the Chesapeake Bay Regional Partnership, because it fits so very well into what we do here at RxSoil, which is really kind of that whole nutrient management plan. So Chesapeake Bay Regional Partnership, it's a collection of government and non-government agencies and organizations that represent, I guess, 64,000 square miles between In the south, it goes down through Virginia, and in the north, I think kind of the middle area of New York State. So it covers a very large amount of area. And this is all the Chesapeake Bay watershed. It's just one of the organizations in this country that is really kind of forward thinking about, what are our current practices in agriculture? What are our current practices in home ownership, in the environment, transportation? What are we thinking about? With the impact of these particular watersheds, and the and being able to have a nutrient management plan is a really helpful part of
Yeah.
of some of the answer to that question. 17% of the nitrogen entering that bay they attribute to chemical fertilizers. 19% of the phosphorus coming in they attribute to that. And
Wow.
those when they get out there, there's a reasonable impact from fertilization. And that isn't to say that we that fertilization isn't any type of bad thing. We've just got to understand how much we're putting down through the process. Kind of that 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet and per application. That's really kind of that limit that we like to go to and not exceed that. But thinking about how many times per year do I need to apply that is something that we really consider when thinking about nitrogen caps. Even kind of doing a little small part from kind of that home ownership standpoint is really going to, in aggregate, if we're all kind of working through this together, be able to help
Mhm.
make a dent in some problems like this in our local watersheds. So, and this happens. This is actually one of the really fun parts about working in this industry is being able to really kind of talk with the customer base over time about why they're testing. Have they ever tested before? Is this your first one? Do we have something to compare it to? Those conversations are really great. A couple ways to get in touch with my team. We've got a phone line open Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern. And we've got a few more extended hours than that by email. We usually like to get back to everybody, usually within an hour or two, if you send us an email. If you also have a small garden and you're growing blueberries and you would like your recommendations kind of adjusted down for the pH of ideal blueberry growth, just any questions that you might have about the soil that you've tested, let us know. And we're always happy to kind of weigh in on some of those recommendations. And thank you so much for having me and just giving me the opportunity to come and just kind of, share a couple of thoughts with the community a little bit. And throughout the process, I just wish everybody a great spring.